Okay, graphs of real-world situations. With real-world situations, you have to be careful because there's such a thing as a reasonableness. In other words, if it can't happen in the real life, it can't be considered in the domain and the range. So, for example, a plumber charges $65 per hour plus a $100 inspection fee. The cost for X hours of work is given by the function f of x equals 65x plus 100. Identify the independent and dependent variables. Well, this is new to you. XY, we know about the XY axis, and we know to think of going to the doctor when you have domain and range. For independent and dependent variables, you have to think of your identification, your ID. So independent is the same as domain, which is the same as X. Dependent, which is the same as range, which is the same as Y. So the independent variable is the X value, and the dependent variable is the Y value. So with that in mind, that's the answer. The independent variable is X. It's the number of hours. Now you always know what goes with X. The word per, each and every, per, each, and every. Usually whatever comes after one of those special words is your independent variable. So it's the number of hours. The dependent variable is the total cost. So that's what the f of x here will stand for. It will stand for the y, which is usually in front of the equal sign, or the dependent variable. Okay, identify a reasonable domain and range and explain your answer. Well, if the domain is the same as x, we're talking about the number of hours. Range is the same as y. That's talking about the total cost. So the reasonable domain is x is greater than or equal to 0, because you can't have a negative numbers of hours and in this real world situation. And the reasonable range, y, has to be greater than or equal to 0, because you can't have a negative cost, because that doesn't make sense. He's not going to give you a refund for the work that he does. Another different example. James brought a plant that was 3 inches tall. Each week the plant grew 2 inches. The function h of x equals 2x plus 3 describes the height of the plant after x weeks. What is the reasonable domain for this function? Okay, again, here's one of those special words I was talking about, each week. Okay, so we're actually talking about the number of weeks. A reasonable domain, x has to be greater than or equal to 0, because you can't have a 0 number of weeks. The plant is growing each week. So it can't have a negative number of weeks. So that's why the reasonable domain has to be 0, greater than or equal to 0. Okay, for the next set of examples, use the graph below for the remaining questions. Explain why x is greater than 0 is not a reasonable domain. Well, domain, again, domain, if you think of going to the doctor, domain is the x-axis. So you're talking about that right there. The function is discrete. That might be a new term for you. Discrete means it has gaps or holes. It's not connected by a solid line. It's got gaps or holes. The least value for x is 0, like I was saying before, and the greatest is 5. Therefore, all numbers greater than 0 can't be in the domain, because the graph ends right there at 5. Okay, the next one. Write a real-world situation that matches this graph. Well, the starting point is 5. So it could, I'm just going to give an example. You could literally write anything, but the starting point is 5. So whatever you write has to start with 5, and this is going down. This function is going down. So you're not going to increase or grow. You're going to decrease or take away. So what I did was I just came up with this. Jason had a box. He starts with 5 granola bars, and each day he eats 1 bar. Because if you look at this, it goes 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. So you could even go further and say that it took him, 5 days to eat those. So that would be the answer or an example for that.